Hi, everyone. This is Amy Crowe. I'm the Summit Financial Education Specialist here at Summit Credit Union, and we are continuing our conversation today with Myra McNair, who is the founder and owner of Anesis Therapy, and she is a BRAVA 2022 Women to Watch. This is a continuation of our Empower Hour Coffee Hour, and we wanted to dig in a little bit more about relationships and money. Myra is going to share with us some valuable tools about having those tough money conversations and turning them into positive goal setting conversations that create financial wellness for your family. Just to start off, we wanted to share out with a couple of summit tips for you. Number one is being able to tap into free resources. That's really important for you. And being on this session today is absolutely a start to that. Number two is going to be able to work with coaches to be able to help you reach your goals, whether that is a life coach, a therapist, or a Summit financial coach. And number three is to take action no matter how small. And Myra is going to be sharing some of those things with us because we know money and all of the surrounding emotions that go with it. Sometimes it's really hard to have those conversations, and money is a super sensitive topic. It really transforms our relationships for the positive or negative, and it could absolutely have some anxiety when we're talking to our friends and family. So, Myra, I wanted to ask you this very first question. It's such a sensitive topic. People feel vulnerable. Sometimes there's power dynamics, there is past experiences. Can you share a little bit more about how we could begin to have those conversations based on, how tough money is sometimes to talk to about with people?
Yeah, money is a very sensitive topic, like you said. It really is kind of a reflection of like where our values are. I mean, if you were to kind of like look at someone's spending over like the last 3 months, right? You could maybe see like what is really important in their life or what they value, right? And so I think it's like very vulnerable, right? To share those things of like, this is what's really important to me. This is what I've been putting my money into, and sometimes we don't even realize, right, that might be a value, and it might be a little embarrassing. Like, wow, I didn't know I was putting that much money into this one thing or this one type of entertainment or event or whatever it is, right? So I think that can be very vulnerable. The one way to really just have these conversations, and to really kind of like decrease anxiety is to normalize having the conversation about money and not making money such a taboo subject. I remember growing up, my mom always telling me, like, when you go to dinner parties, Myra, there's just certain things that you don't talk about, right? And she's like, politics. And then money was one of those things, right? And she's like, and you never talk about your money. And so I think we kind of grow up with this notion of like, that's personal, it's private. Um, People make different things, people have resources that they, know about. And a lot of these things are kind of like all kept to yourself, right? But what happens when we're in relationship and we're supposed to be really close to someone, share life with somebody? You have to talk about money, right? And now this needs to be a very normalized conversation, we've kind of been taught not to have those conversations at all.
Think what you're saying, it used to be really rude. But if you
Yes.
are not sharing and talking with your friends about basic money conversations,
Right.
how you did this, how you do this type of things, not our incomes, not how much debt we have or how much money's in our savings account, it's how are people doing this tactfully or tactically, right? How
Yes.
are they saving money? How are they doing the things that they want to be doing? And so kind of breaking those taboo topics are really important. And that's one of the things Summit Credit Union has worked to do for the past 16 years with our Project Money program. It's a challenge where we have 4 participants work with 4 financial coaches over 7 months. And it could be a single person working on relationships that she has with family, friends, or her kids or his kids to be able to change their money habits, or it could be a partnership. It could also be a married couple. And so we're looking at those types of things. And what we've discovered through the 16 years is that feelings are driven by money. Like right now, our economy, inflation, everything is super tight, budgets are stressed, anxiety is higher, and it is also based on social pressures. If somebody has more money than somebody else and friends say, hey, let's go do this, but you really can't afford it and you do it anyway because you don't
Mhm.
want to say no, or like you said, you don't want to say that I can't do this, right? We need to normalize those conversations with our family and friends. And so the Project Money program is super interesting because one year, several years back, we had this couple and there had been a business that had failed in their relationship, and there was several $1,000s left on a business loan that needed to be paid off. Well,
Mm.
every time the spouse would write a check to the business to pay off that failed business, and she felt resentment. And
Mhm.
so what ended up happening is they worked through a budget. They worked collaboratively to set a time frame to be able to pay off that debt. They had some money in savings that they were willing to use to pay off that debt a little quicker, as well as their monthly payments. And by the end of Project Money, they went from this negative mindset of resentment and stress and anxiety to really being on the same page and looking forward to the future. But there had to be some really hard conversations there. They had to meet those feelings head on. So when you have kind of this emotional baggage from maybe how you grew up, or a setback that you've had with your money, or a setback that a spouse is bringing into a relationship, how do you really dig in and kind of start having those conversations with the person that you need to?
It comes with so many beliefs, right? And values, money, and like how we talk about it. So really, when people are growing up, what have they experienced? Like, what did their parents do? Was money talked about in the house, or was it just one person that had control of all the money, and they kind of, set out what was spent, spent out? And does your partner now have that same belief? And so sometimes it really does help. I'm so happy you talked about the coaches that you have, talking to a therapist, talking to even like financial counselors that can talk to you before you even get married, right? About finances, which I would really suggest doing that beforehand. But I think there's some really interesting questions of like really asking someone like, how was money utilized in your house, or how was it talked about, or who handled the money? What was that like? You know, I heard one person who talks about budgeting all the time, and she would always talk about how she would always see her mom every Saturday morning just stress. It was when she would pay
Mm.
bills, and she just looked just stressed. She just was in her rollers, like it was just not a fun thing, and that's how she was paying her bills every Saturday. And so she associated budgeting and paying bills being this like horrible feeling, and she didn't want anything to do with it, right? And so I think we just even by watching our parents or whoever our caregivers are, we have some of those beliefs that we carry with us, and we don't even know that we carry them. So definitely having those conversations, hopefully before you decide to get married about money, because I think people go into a marriage or a relationship with expectations like, oh, I just assumed we would have separate accounts. I just assumed that you would pay for this. I would just assume that you would talk to me before spending a certain amount, right? But no one actually has verbalized those expectations that they have for one another.
I would totally agree with that. And we discovered that through Project Money as well. There was this family who came together, and our coach had them sit back to back, and they each had to write down all of their financial goals and the things that they wanted to out of life. And then what happened was they turned around and they shared their goals. And for the common goals, they both took money out of their incomes, which, by the way, were not the same because the woman made less than the man. And so they had to kind of figure out, who was going to pay more, who was paying for what, all of that type of stuff. But they collaboratively started sharing, setting goals together, both contributing to those goals.
Mhm.
And then they had their separate goals, and they could
Yeah.
both work towards their goals. And the conversation was even, if I make more money than you, how can I help you reach your goal? It wasn't just that she has to wait longer because she has less money, because we all know women make less than typical white men because of the gender gap. But it definitely was one of those things where we want to be, how do we start having these conversations? How can each other help each other? Because who does the most of the spending in the family? Women do. And so technically, sometimes we have more credit card debt. And so
Mm.
that will affect our ability to get loans as well. So setting goals is really, really important. But Myra, what happens when somebody is really resistant to getting on the same page with somebody?
Yeah. When resistance happens, and it's actually very common, we know that sometimes, and I'm using marriage relationships, we know like it can happen in other relationships, right? But we know that the number one, reason of for divorce is over financial, disagreements, financial infidelity, or just not being on that same page, right? We need money to live. Like it's a huge part of our lives. We can't say money doesn't matter. It does matter. And that's why we have so much feelings and attachment to it because we know we need that in exchange to do our day-to-day lives. And so, for that resistance, we need to know that it's really important that one, that it's probably going to just happen, right? There is going to be some resistance of, somebody maybe in the relationship either may not want to have these conversations or may not want to set goals. Um, Hopefully that's not a thing that will stay. I think those things can be worked through. But if there is resistance and someone is still willing to kind of acknowledge that there is some resistance and want to work through that, definitely to go see a coach, to see a therapist, to set those goals. And it really does help to have kind of like that third party person that is like outside of your box that you're in with your partner, that they can really come in and ask those questions and really figure out, okay, here's where the resistance is, but here are the goals that I'm hearing you guys both do agree on. And let's focus on like what you both want. Because it sounds like there might be some things that you both value, and that are both important, that are important for both of you. Let's focus on that. And it just kind of helps to have that third party or that other person to
Yeah.
help point out those things.
And I think what's interesting too is being able to use tools to be able to help with that. So we have a budget worksheet out on our website. All you have to do is go to summitcreditunion.com in the search menu, just hit budget worksheet. And you can utilize that tool when you're having those discussions based on some of the resistance. So you can put both incomes in there and regardless of how you do your money, if it's completely separate, if it's some of it's combined, if it is all combined, if it's you're living with someone and you're not married, however that is, you can have a joint household budget. And by literally looking at each of the categories, understanding whose name is on what bills, looking at it and saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're only going to spend money on this because we want to, and really put it on paper. That's
Yeah.
a tactical way to really understand and take it out of the just
Mhm.
verbalization of your budget. You're working through a plan together. And what's great about our budget worksheet, Myra, is it has a now column and a future column. So you could say, here's where we are now. And here's where we'd like to be. And you can play with the numbers and start having
Mhm.
those negotiations. Because when you have resistance and you're talking about those emotions, you're like, okay, I don't know if I really want to do this because they're in the back of their mind. They're thinking about all these other things that they have to do. And so
Mhm.
having that piece of paper is really going to help them. Sometimes budgets actually help people create limits and boundaries. Do you have
Yes.
anything to share about limits and boundaries in relationships?
Yeah. I think it's really, again, expectations, right? That you talk about those, like what your expectations, and don't assume that the other person knows what your expectations are. And you might have to ask yourself some questions because it might be so normalized to you. And you might feel like, well, of course, if anyone spends over $250, that I would notify my partner, right? Like, of course I would do that. Of course they would do that, but the other person may not know that that's your expectation, and they might spend $1,000 and think, you know hey, that's my money that I made and I don't need to speak about that. So it's important to check in about these expectations that you think that like everyone might have like you, and know, like, first of all, like, no, not everyone has your same expectations. You need to know what they are, and then you need to communicate those with your partner so they know. And they may disagree, right? And they
Mhm.
may have expectations on you as well that you may disagree with. And you're going to have to figure out, how can we meet in the middle, right? What's important? What's our goals? That comes first. Us as a family, as a couple, those goals come first. And then these other things can come, right? Like these are extra things, maybe. And where can we make some compromise? and meet each other in the middle.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things too, where we're going back to the beginning of what we said is check in with those resources. Summit Credit Union has podcasts and on-demand webinars that both parties can sit down and watch and better understand how to budget or mindful spending or seasonal spending or how to consolidate debt, all of those types of things. So it's getting those resources. It's being vulnerable enough, like you said, Myra, to be able to have those hard conversations. It's taking the actionable items, like you said, understanding those past experiences, creating those goals, creating that budget, working through it. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight.
No.
It's going to happen so take it in small chunks, right? And set a time period. So if you're the one who's initiating those conversations, know that, it's not going to all happen at once. It's going to take some time. Myra, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for the continuation of the BRAVA Empower Hour Coffee Hour conversation. And I just want to thank you for your expertise in really thinking about how those tough money conversations can really lead to financial wellness and giving some tips and tools to our audience today. So I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.